There is a practice so quiet that it left no trace in any book, so still that it produced no visible ritual for outsiders to observe, so simple that it required nothing except the willingness to stop, that Jewish families across the Sephardic and Mizrachi world performed once every single week for centuries. And if you had been watching from outside the window of one of these homes at the moment the practice was taking place, you would have seen nothing, absolutely nothing. No candles being lit, no prayers being recited, no objects being placed or moved. You would have seen a family sitting together in their living room or at their kitchen table, motionless, silent, eyes open or closed, doing what appeared to be exactly nothing for a period that lasted somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. And you would have walked away thinking you had witnessed the most unremarkable moment of their week. You would have been wrong. You would have been witnessing the single most spiritually powerful thing that family did all week. More powerful than their prayers, more powerful than their blessings, more powerful than their Friday night rituals, more powerful than every practice I have shared on this channel combined. Because silence in the Kabbalistic tradition is not the absence of spiritual activity. It is the highest form of it. And a family that sits together in intentional silence once a week activates a dimension of divine connection that no amount of words, however sacred, can reach. This practice has been almost completely forgotten. Even in observant Jewish homes today, where prayers are recited and blessings are spoken and candles are lit with beautiful regularity, the practice of deliberate communal weekly silence has vanished. And with its disappearance, something essential has been lost, a quality of spiritual depth, of domestic peace, of family cohesion, that the grandmothers who maintained this practice considered irreplaceable, and that the modern world, drowning in noise and stimulation. My grandmother gave me these secrets in her home 50 years ago. Every blessing, every protection, every tradition that makes a Jewish home truly sacred. Now I've gathered them all into one book just for you. Visit the link in the description or pinned comment and let me be your grandmother too. And the relentless demand to fill every moment with activity desperately needs to recover. Before I describe the practice, you need to understand what silence actually is in the Jewish mystical tradition, because the modern world has fundamentally misunderstood it. Modern culture treats silence as emptiness, the absence of sound, the gap between words, the void that exists when nothing is happening. In the Kabbalistic tradition, silence is the opposite of emptiness. Silence is fullness. Silence is the state in which the divine presence is most accessible, most concentrated, most powerfully active. Silence is not what happens when God stops speaking. Silence is what happens when God is speaking so deeply, so intimately, so far beyond the capacity of human language to capture that words become obstacles rather than vehicles. The highest communication between the Creator and the created does not occur through language. It occurs through silence. And a family that creates a space of intentional silence within their home once a week is creating a space where the highest form of divine communication can occur, not as individual prayer, not as personal meditation, but as a communal experience shared by every soul in the household simultaneously. The Zohar contains a teaching about silence that stops most people in their tracks when they encounter it for the first time. It states that the highest Sephirah, Keter, the crown, the point of absolute unity between the divine and the created, cannot be reached through speech. It can only be reached through silence. All the prayers, all the blessings, all the sacred recitations that form the substance of Jewish spiritual life, all of these operate within the lower Sephirot, the channels that connect the physical world to the spiritual world through the medium of language. But Keter is beyond language. It exists in a realm where words dissolve, where distinctions between speaker and listener collapse, where the boundary between the human soul and the divine source is so thin that even the finest words would be too coarse to cross it. Only silence is refined enough to enter Keter. Only silence can carry the soul to the absolute peak of the tree of life, the place where the Creator's will originates before it descends through the Sephirot and manifests in the physical world as blessing, protection, and provision. This teaching explains something that most people find paradoxical about Psalm 65, which I discussed in a previous teaching. Verse 2 of that psalm declares, Lecha demia tehila. To you, silence is praise, not song, not prayer, not eloquent words of gratitude, silence. The psalmist understood that the highest praise a human being can offer God is not something spoken, but something surrendered. The surrender of the compulsion to fill every moment with sound. The surrender of the ego that believes it must always be producing. The surrender of the mind that insists it must always be processing. When you sit in silence before God, you are not failing to praise. You are praising at the highest possible level, a level that words, however beautiful, cannot reach. The weekly family silence practice was rooted in this understanding and was performed most commonly on Shabbat afternoon, the period between the midday meal and the evening, when the spiritual energy of Shabbat is at its deepest and most interior. The morning of Shabbat carries the energy of ascent, the soul rising, the prayers climbing, the family gathering in an active expression of sacred joy. But the afternoon of Shabbat carries the energy of depth, a settling, a going inward, a profound stillness that the Kabbalists called Raza de Shabbat, the secret of Shabbat, the hidden dimension of the seventh day that reveals itself only to those who are still enough to perceive it. The grandmothers who maintained this practice would gather the family after the midday meal, not immediately after, but after the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean, when the practical obligations of the day had been fulfilled and there was nothing left to do. Nothing left to do. That phrase itself was revolutionary in households where there was always something to do. The grandmother would declare the moment, sometimes with a word, sometimes with nothing more than a look that the family had learned to recognize. My grandmother gave me these secrets in her home 50 years ago. Every blessing, every protection, every tradition that makes a Jewish home truly sacred. Now I've gathered them all into one book just for you. Visit the link in the description or pinned comment and let me be your grandmother too. And the household would go quiet. Not the artificial quiet of everyone be silent. The organic quiet of a family that has learned to descend together into a shared stillness, each member finding their own way into the silence, some closing their eyes, some gazing softly at the table or out the window, some holding hands, some sitting separately, all of them breathing the same quiet air and sharing, without words, a quality of togetherness that no conversation could produce. The silence lasted between 10 and 20 minutes. There was no timer, no bell, no signal to begin or end. The grandmother felt when the silence was complete, When the room had settled into its deepest point and begun almost imperceptibly to rise again, and she would break it gently, usually with a single word of blessing, or a soft sigh, or simply by standing and moving to the kitchen to prepare tea. The family would emerge from the silence slowly, naturally, the way a person emerges from deep water, not with a gasp, but with a gentle resurfacing, blinking, stretching, looking at each other with a quality of presence that had not been there before the silence began. What happened during those 10 to 20 minutes was not nothing. It was, according to the Kabbalistic tradition, the most spiritually productive period of the family's entire week. Let me explain what the tradition teaches about what occurs in communal silence, because it is extraordinary. First, the individual souls of the family members, which during the active hours of the week operate as separate entities, each person pursuing their own thoughts, their own concerns, their own relationship with the divine, temporarily merge. Not in the sense that individual identity is lost, in the sense that the boundaries between family members become permeable, allowing a quality of spiritual communion that speech actually prevents. When we speak to each other, we are defining ourselves as separate. I am the speaker, you are the listener. There is a message traveling between two distinct points. When we sit in silence together, the distinction between speaker and listener dissolves, and what remains is not two separate people, but a single shared field of awareness. The Kabbalists called this experience yichud, unification, and they considered the momentary unification of family souls during shared silence to be one of the most healing and empowering spiritual experiences available to human beings. Second, the home soul responds to communal silence with a quality of receptivity that it cannot achieve when the household is filled with sound. I spoke in a previous teaching about the home having a neshama, a divine spark that connects the dwelling to its creator. During the noise and activity of daily life, this neshama operates at a low level, partially obscured by the constant vibration of speech, movement, electronic devices, and the thousand sounds that fill a modern home. During communal silence, the neshama of the home activates fully. The home itself enters a state of spiritual receptivity so profound that the divine presence, the Shechina, can descend into it with a completeness that is not possible during any other time. The grandmothers described this experience in remarkably consistent terms across different communities. They said the home felt different during the silence, fuller, warmer, more present, as if the walls themselves had drawn a deep breath and were holding it, waiting, receiving something invisible and precious from above. This was the Shechina entering the home through the open channel of silence, filling the dwelling with a quality of divine presence that would remain, diminished but still detectable, throughout the following week. Third, the silence created a space for what the Kabbalists called tikkun hamishpacha, the repair of the family. During the normal course of a week, small injuries accumulate between family members. A sharp word spoken in frustration, a request ignored, a moment of distance where closeness was needed. These injuries are often too small to address verbally. Bringing them up would seem petty, and the family moves on without acknowledging them. But they do not disappear. They accumulate in the spiritual space between family members, creating a subtle but growing distance that, over months and years, can become a gulf. The weekly silence was understood to be the family's opportunity for these small injuries to heal, without the need for words. In the shared stillness, the defensive barriers that family members maintain during active interaction softened. The unspoken resentments, the small wounds, the accumulated distance, all of these were exposed to the healing presence of the Shekhinah that filled the room during silence, and they dissolved, not through confrontation, not through discussion, through the simple, powerful act of being still together in the presence of something greater than any individual grievance. There was a family in the Jewish community of Isfahan, Iran, whose weekly silence practice was maintained for at least 4 generations. The family's matriarch at the time this story was recorded, a woman named Taheri, which means pure, described the practice with a clarity that has stayed with me. She said, "During the week, we are a family of separate people. We have our own worries, our own plans, our own arguments. But during the silence on Shabbat afternoon, we become one thing, not one person, one thing, like a hand with 5 fingers. During the week, the fingers move separately. During the silence, they close together and become a fist, not a fist of anger, a fist of strength. And that strength carries us through the next week until we sit in silence again." That image, the open hand becoming a fist of strength, captures something that I believe modern families need to hear desperately. The modern family is an open hand. Its members move separately through their separate lives, connected by love and obligation, but rarely by the kind of deep spiritual communion that transforms a collection of individuals into a unified force. The weekly silence practice closes the hand. It creates, for 10 to 20 minutes each week, a shared experience of such depth and intimacy that the family emerges from it strengthened in ways that no family activity, however enjoyable, can replicate. A family that plays together bonds. A family that prays together bonds more deeply. But a family that sits in silence together bonds at the deepest level available to human beings. The level where individual souls merge temporarily into a shared field of awareness and emerge renewed, repaired, and reinforced for another week of separate movement through a noisy world. Now let me give you the complete practice so you can begin this week. Choose a time when the household is naturally quiet and the obligations of the day have been met. Shabbat afternoon is traditional and ideal because the spiritual atmosphere supports the practice, but any consistent weekly time will work. What matters is consistency, the same time each week, so the family learns to anticipate and prepare for it. Gather in one room. The kitchen table is traditional because it is the altar of the home, but the living room works equally well. Any room where the family can sit comfortably without physical discomfort that would break the silence prematurely. Remove distractions. Phones off or in another room entirely. Television off. Music off. No electronic sound of any kind. The silence must be total, not the partial silence of a muted television with subtitles still flickering, but genuine, complete silence in which the only sounds are the breathing of the family members and the natural sounds of the home itself. Sit comfortably. There is no prescribed posture. Chairs, cushions, a sofa. Whatever allows each family member to be physically relaxed. The body must be comfortable enough to be forgotten for 10 to 20 minutes, because if the body is demanding attention through discomfort, the mind cannot release into silence. The grandmother or the parent who initiates the practice marks the beginning, not with a dramatic announcement, but with a simple, gentle signal. Some grandmothers simply closed their eyes, and the family followed. Some placed their hands flat on the table, which the family recognized as the signal to settle. Some spoke a single phrase, "Let us be still," or "Shh, the Shekinah is coming," and the household went quiet. The signal should be gentle, consistent, and recognizable. Over time, the family will learn to transition into silence as naturally as they transition into conversation. Once the silence begins, do nothing. This is the hardest instruction and the most important. Do not pray silently. Do not meditate on a specific concept. Do not try to achieve a spiritual state. Do not attempt to feel the divine presence. Do not evaluate whether the silence is working. Simply sit. Simply breathe. Simply be present in the room with your family, sharing the same air, the same stillness, the same moment. The mind will resist. It will generate thoughts, plans, worries, memories, mental to-do lists. This is normal. The grandmothers did not teach their families to suppress these thoughts. They taught them to let the thoughts pass, to notice them without engaging them, the way you might notice a bird flying past a window without getting up to follow it. The thoughts come, the thoughts go, the silence remains. And gradually, over the course of 10 to 15 minutes, the thoughts slow down, the mental noise decreases, and what remains is a quality of presence, a shared, wordless awareness of being together in a space that feels increasingly still, increasingly full, increasingly sacred. The silence ends when it ends. The grandmother felt the natural completion, a subtle shift in the room's energy, a sense that the deepest point had been reached and passed, a gentle rising of awareness back toward the surface. If you are beginning this practice and do not yet have the sensitivity to feel the natural completion, simply set a gentle timer for 15 minutes and allow the silence to end when the timer sounds. Over months of practice, the internal sense of completion will develop, and the timer will become unnecessary. After the silence, do not immediately launch into conversation or activity. The transition should be gradual, a few moments of gentle movement, stretching, sighing, opening eyes if they were closed. Then perhaps a simple shared act, pouring tea, passing a plate of fruit, exchanging a smile. Let the family resurface naturally, carrying the quality of the silence with them into the next few minutes, allowing it to infuse the transition back into ordinary life with the peace and depth it generated. I want to address the practical challenges that modern families will face when attempting this practice, because the grandmothers, despite living in simpler times, face challenges too. Children are the most common concern. Can children sit in silence? The grandmothers would answer with a firm yes, but with the understanding that children participate differently than adults. Very young children were held in a parent's lap during the silence, where the warmth of physical contact kept them calm, and the parent's stillness communicated the expectation of quiet. Older children were expected to sit still for the duration, and most of them learned to do so within a few weeks of practice, not through discipline or punishment, but through the natural process of imitation. Children who see their parents sitting in genuine, peaceful silence become curious about what the parents are experiencing, and that curiosity leads to participation far more effectively than any rule or requirement. The grandmothers who were most successful at including children in the practice were the ones who never forced it. They simply sat in silence themselves, and the children, drawn by the magnetic quality of a peaceful parent, gradually joined. The other common challenge is the restlessness of adults who have never practiced intentional silence and find it deeply uncomfortable. This discomfort is itself significant. The Kabbalists taught that the inability to sit in silence is a symptom of spiritual disconnection, a sign that the soul has become so enmeshed in the noise of daily life that it has forgotten how to be still. The discomfort is not a reason to avoid the practice. It is a reason to pursue it. The first few sessions may feel awkward, forced, even unpleasant. The mind will race, the body will fidget. The urge to speak will be almost overwhelming. This is normal. It passes. Within 3 to 4 weeks of consistent practice, the discomfort diminishes, and what replaces it is a growing sense of relief. The relief of a soul that has been running for years and has finally been given permission to stop. There was a teaching among the grandmothers of the Moroccan Jewish community that I find particularly beautiful. They said, 6 days a week we fill the house with words. On the 7th day, we fill it with what the words were trying to say. That distinction, between words and what words are trying to say, captures the essence of this entire teaching. Words are vehicles. They carry meaning from one person to another. But they are imperfect vehicles. They approximate. They simplify. They reduce the infinite complexity of what one soul wants to communicate to another into a finite string of sounds that can never fully capture what is being conveyed. Silence does not have this limitation. Silence communicates everything at once: love, presence, solidarity, forgiveness, gratitude, hope, without the distortion that language inevitably introduces. A family sitting in silence together is a family communicating at the highest possible bandwidth, transmitting and receiving everything that words spend the entire week trying and failing to express. The Talmud records that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the sage traditionally credited as the author of the Zohar, would sit with his students in silence for extended periods, and these periods of silence were considered the most advanced form of Torah study, not the reading of texts, not the debate of legal principles. Silence, because in silence the Torah speaks directly to the soul, without the intermediary of human interpretation. And what the soul receives in 1 minute of genuine silence exceeds what the mind can absorb in hours of study. The weekly family silence practice applies this principle to the domestic setting. In silence, the family receives directly from the divine source, receives blessing, healing, unity, strength, without the intermediary of ritual, prayer, or any other structured spiritual activity. The silence is the practice. The silence is the prayer. The silence is everything. Begin this week. Choose your time. Gather your family. Sit down and stop. Stop talking. Stop doing. Stop producing. Stop filling every moment with sound and motion and the relentless forward push of a life that never pauses long enough to receive what the universe is trying to give. Just stop for 10 minutes, once a week, and discover what the grandmothers discovered centuries ago, that the most powerful thing a family can do together is nothing at all. May your home know the sound of silence. May the Shekhinah descend into the stillness you create and fill your dwelling with a presence that no words can invoke and no noise can sustain. May your family become a closed fist of strength once a week, unified, repaired, renewed by a practice so simple that the modern world dismissed it, and so powerful that the ancient world built entire lifetimes around it. Share this with a family that has forgotten how to be quiet together, a family drowning in noise and activity, and the exhausting illusion that doing more means being more. Subscribe to this channel, because every teaching we share is another invitation to return to the ancient foundations. And this teaching, this practice of sacred, communal, weekly silence, may be the deepest foundation of all. May abundance, protection, and divine favor follow you in everything you do. Amen.